Good morning, everybody. I'm hoping that we are ready to start. So welcome to this meeting of the Strategy and Resources and Performance Committee. I think, Michelle, you've got my notes. But anyway, we'll start anyway. So the first item on the agenda is apologies and absence.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, the first item, constitutionally, we have to have the notification of the Chair and Vice Chair. And just to confirm, that is, of course, Councillor Nestinger is the Chair and Councillor Miskinny is the Vice Chair as appointed at the annual meeting of Council in May. And apologies are from Councillors David Ambrose Smith and Councillor Criswell is substituting, and Councillor Richard Howett and Councillor Goodliffe is substituting, and Councillor Peter MacDonald and Councillor Batchelor is substituting.
Thank you very much. And I think good. Have we covered the fire alarm as well? There is no fire alarm. So, and just to remind members of the committee that there is a briefing at 1:30 on Risk 8. Good. Item 3 on the, have we done disclosable pecuniary interests? Let's do, does anybody wish to declare any interests at the start of this meeting? Disclosable or non-disclosable interests? I don't see any hands. If anybody wishes to disclose an interest at a later point in the meeting, they're very welcome to do so. Item 3, we are being asked to approve the minutes of the Strategy and Resources and Performance Committee as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, could you raise your hand now? In the absence of any hands, I will approve the minutes as an accurate record, and we will take that as carried unanimously. And the update on the action log is also included. Most of the actions are complete with an explanation against the 4 which are ongoing. Questions on the action log? So, Councillor Cant.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want to raise something on the action log, and this is on page 14, and it's regarding the deep dive into the energy projects. I said that we still hadn't seen that, and then we have been circulated by links to what had been considered by the E&GI committee and was regarded as a deep dive. I've already fed back to officers when I received that, having read that report. And I've got to say, I was sorely disappointed that what was circulated was regarded as a deep dive. For those that haven't seen my email, I will simply say that the conclusion of that was that the projects are difficult. And therefore, if we add more time and money at the start, we can probably manage. I don't regard that outcome as sufficiently robust from a deep dive or a conclusion. I would have liked to have seen a lot more information on the individual items. Now, if we take something such as the excessive inflation we've seen in recent years as being something that was difficult to predict at the time the projects went forward and therefore caused an increase in costs, that would be quite reasonable. But then there would be secondary questions asking how did the contracts and the risk in the contracts deal with that kind of thing? So I've got to say that my conclusion is either the Joint Administration is satisfied that that deep dive is good enough, or the Joint Administration should say, could we have some more information and really analyse what we could do differently next time, as opposed to simply saying more money, more time, and we should be okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for raising that. I have discussed this with Michael, and I'll come to Michael now.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Apologies, Councillor Count. Acknowledging your email was sent with a number of items on today's agenda, prioritising those. I've not had a chance to reply, but I will respond. There is further update to the Audit and Accounts Committee that I'll share, but I've also asked, and I was just trying to see if Mairead was here, internal audit in terms of thoughts, in terms of a further review of that, and I'm discussing that with Mairead and Frank. So mine's just opening, so it should say ongoing, so there'll be further updates on that.
I hope that's helpful. Councillor Camp.
That's very helpful. I'm very reassured by that, and I'm glad that the email I sent has helped assist, or if not kick off, that piece of work. I would therefore ask, Chair, that this is not marked as complete, but is changed to further updates to come. And then, although I'm not on the audit committee, I would like to be circulated with the specific links to any reports that go. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think that's a very reasonable request and will be taken forward. Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands. So we will move on to item 4, which is public questions and petitions. None have been received. So then we move to item 5, which is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report for the year ending 31st of March. Stephen.
Good morning, Chair and everybody. Thank you. So this report presents the consolidated management accounts of the Council for the year end 2023-24. It sets out the outturn revenue and capital budgets position, the position of the balance sheet, and an update on maintained schools. So overall, in 23-24, the Council's core revenue budget saw a close to balanced position with an outturn of £1.2 million overspend against a £502 million net budget, or 0.2%. In 23-24, the Council faced significant financial pressures in line with many councils nationally. In particular, we saw a high cost of placements for children in care and home to school transport pressures, as well as temporary delays to renewable energy income generation schemes and increased waste disposal costs while the Wartbeach treatment plant was not in service. These pressures were mostly offset and mitigated through lower than expected spend within adult social care services, with demand not increasing by the scale budgeted for, and capital financing and additional business rates and grant funding in the year. Management action to identify and drive spending restraint over the second half of the year contributed to a year-end position that was improved from that reported halfway through the year. Where pressures were judged to be ongoing, provision was made for the effect of them in the business plan for 24-25. This year-end position is contingent on several transfers from earmarked reserves set out at 5.2.1 of Annex A, or page 41, I think, of the pack. These transfers total £3.2 million. 2.7 million of that relates to drawing funding from the Major Infrastructure Costs Reserve to meet costs incurred for the guided busway. And members will recall that that reserve was set up specifically for this purpose with funding from the recent legal settlement. The remainder of the reserves drawdown relates to reserves identified at year-end as not required and therefore proposed to be released to mitigate pressures in children's services and place and sustainability. The Council's capital programme for 23-24 underspent by a net £21.7 million, or 11%, in 23-24. Much of this was due to slippage or delayed spend, as members will see in the next item, with spend expected to catch up in the current or later years. Causes of the underspends on schemes are set out scheme by scheme in Appendix 2 to the report, but are a mixture of overall underspends by delivered schemes, such as some schools projects, slower than expected spend on schemes in progress, in some cases such as energy schemes linked to the revenue overspend, or schemes discontinued, such as the Intensive Therapeutic Support Hub, which is replaced in the New Year's budget by the Children's Residential Strategy. So while the core revenue budget was close to balance, the Council again saw a large overspend on its ring-fenced dedicated schools grant budgets, particularly the high needs block. The position is set out on that in some detail at 2.2 of the main annex, but in summary, we saw a £14.6 million overspend in year, taking the cumulative deficit on the DSG to around 40 million. That deficit is still ring-fenced under current regulations and is subject to an agreement with the central government to bring the growth in the deficit down that is ongoing. Linked to that is the year-end position of the Council's maintained schools, of which there are still over 120, set out in detail at 5.5 of the main annex. Again, like many councils nationally, schools in Cambridgeshire are facing financial pressures from rising costs and needs, while funding, which mainly comes from central government via fixed grants, has not kept up. At the end of 23-24, 31 of our schools had a deficit balance, double the number at the end of the previous year. Overall, maintained schools in Cambridgeshire have a positive reserve balance, but that is diminishing year on year as we go through. Ultimately, maintained schools form part of the council in an accounting sense, so their financial health does need to continue to be a focus of attention for us. Other than those items, the report sets out information on the council's borrowing position covered later in the agenda in some more detail, the final savings tracker for the year and the year-end reserves position for the council, as well as more detail on services which are in this committee's direct remit. But I'll leave the introduction there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. I'm sure there will be questions for Stephen on this. Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, Stephen, thank you for the report. I've got a number of questions, but I'm going to limit them because I'm sure other people have got them as well. My main question is at the bottom of page 27 of the narrative, going into page 28. It says, in addition, admissions data showed a growth of children and young people with SEND continued to rise above that which we forecast, therefore creating ongoing demand for more complex routes, such as solo travel. Have we got a problem with our forecasting? Because everything else seems to be pretty tight. I just wonder what's going on in that area that's causing us such big problems. Because, you know, at the end of the day, the home to school transport is a revised outturn of 3.5 million overspend. You know, it's a huge number and a huge issue for us, but we're actually saying here that we got the forecasting wrong. So I'd like some comments on that, please.
Forecasting all of our demand-led budgets is extremely difficult. This one in particular, home school transport for children with special educational needs, is one of the hardest areas, and this links into that overspend on the dedicated schools grant, the high needs block. So the year-on-year increase in children with education, health and care plans that has pretty much driven that overspend on the DSG has a knock-on impact, which is the impact on transporting those children to schools. So clearly, forecast the cost and the number of children with EHCPs has increased more than we've budgeted for, hence the overspend on the high needs block of the DSG, and so that knock-on impact is into the revenue budget on transport. So we review the forecasting methodology year on year. Clearly, we didn't forecast when we set the budget the scale of the growth in spend on this budget line. Mitigations were found elsewhere in the budget.
Okay, all of that perfectly plausible, and I totally accept. I think my real concern here is, you know, is this because, as a positive, negative to the outturn, but as a positive, we are enabling more children with SEND to get seen earlier, and therefore we've got a higher demand? Or I think the mismatch for me is that what this report tells us is we forecast X, it turned out to be X plus plus plus, and Y. That's the bit I'm missing.
I'm going to come to Bryony as chair of CYP, who I think will be able to answer some of the broader points around children in and SEND, and then I'll come back to other questions which may be on other areas of the report. Bryony.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really complex picture is the answer. There is an increase in diagnosis. There's a huge uptick in the number of children, young people presenting with complex mental health issues, which has increased exponentially. We have more and more children surviving previously unsurvivable issues, which is great. But obviously, these are all children who require specialist schooling or assistance in mainstream schooling. And all of that combined has created some of these issues, some of those with intersectionality, so the cross diagnoses, if you like, of both physical, mental and neurodiverse issues have all led to this increase. And the cost of transport has also gone up exponentially. So it's the combination of all which has taken us slightly by surprise in terms of our forecasting.
And if I may, through you, Chair, just come back on that one last time. Thank you. It's glad you're in the room, but so that's very useful. In my simple brain, there must be a point where £3.5 million of overspend per year equates to an extra provision in SEND to alleviate this problem, SEND provision. So what are we doing in terms of alleviating this problem from the top down rather than from the bottom up?
Lots, if you like. We've increased our early help offer, which means that we're putting more in earlier to try and prevent escalation of issues. We're working with our schools to implement more of our enhanced resource bases, which are within mainstream schools, to ensure that children can be supported well in mainstream to stay in mainstreams. We have 2 new free school special schools on order, if you like, from the government, and those are coming on board as soon as we can. And we're also obviously working with the independent sector where we need to make sure the right places for the children at the right time.
Thank you very much for all questions on that, which is a really important area. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. I found that exchange extremely interesting. And it's something which I know a great deal of attention has been paid to for very obvious reasons. But what I also found very helpful was the comment that the high needs block forecasting for budgeting purposes, that methodology is being reviewed. And I'd be really interested to get any indication as to what that is likely to look like in terms of a review, in terms of demand. Now, when we talk about survivability of conditions which previously wouldn't have been survivable, in the way in which that feeds into the high needs block surely is much more predictable, given that by the time an individual child is able to go to school, there will have been a number of years to have the statistics for that. So I'm interested to know if just what this change of methodology is moving towards. I'm not asking for a specific number, although I'd love to hear what was thought of. But are we talking about an ever increasing trajectory here? And if so, I think that would be really important for us to understand. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make a suggestion that we might get a briefing note on this sent to the committee, because I do think it's a really important area for our budget. It's a really important area for this this committee of the council to understand, because it's such a large area of risk for us. I will come back to Bryony, but I think possibly getting a briefing note sent round so that we can all understand exactly what work the Children and Young People's Committee is doing in this space might be the best option. Bryony.
The only other thing I would add is it's a nationwide phenomenon that these are increasing. It's not an isolated Cambridgeshire issue.
Chris.
Is the under budgeting also a nationwide issue?
Yes.
So there's been a widespread failure right across the board.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.
I mean, so to give a little bit more specificity on that, I think that the home to school transport issue that we started off discussing, we are somewhat of an outlier in the extent of our costs in that space. But in terms of the rising numbers and the rising costs of children's special educational needs and placements, that is a national issue. And I don't think we are an outlier, but at least not by much in that space. So, but I think that probably having a relatively detailed briefing note for all members on this would probably be helpful. So I'll if we can pick that up as an action, Michelle, that would be very helpful. Graham.
On a slightly more positive note, could we congratulate officers for the very low level of overspend on our revenue budget in 2023-24? I think it is an amazing overall result, despite some of the individual issues that we have talked about. And I wonder whether Michael could also clarify where we are on external auditing of these accounts, so the committee is fully aware of the situation which is being faced nationally. Thank you.
Are you happy, Michael? Yeah.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So the 23-24 accounts have been published in draft for audit. We met the statutory deadline of the 31st of May. We're presently going through a period of public inspection, and our auditors, KPMG, our new auditors for this year, are due on site to start their audit imminently. I'm pleased to say that in terms of prior years, up to 22-23, we now have full sign-off of opinion and value for money from our previous auditors. However, 22-23 remains a matter for national resolution in terms of the audit delays, and we've seen a delay in that decision making and regulations required for any potential backstop. So that could impact on the 23-24 accounts. We hope not, but with the new government taking stock of that, we hope to hear about that in the coming week. So I'll be able to update the Audit and Accounts Committee at the next meeting.
Thank you. Very helpful. Steve.
I have a number of points, so if officers wish to use a pen to pick up on some of the things. Some of them are comments, some of them are questions. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things that have been said so far. Councillor Wilson, through you, Chair. I'm not sure that the picture is quite as rosy as pictured, as painted, when you have over £200 million of reserves, or close on £200 million of reserves, and you actually use those reserves that 1 minute we're told are unavailable when we wish to spend them, and use them in year to change the actual targets budgets. So you come out with a low outturn. That actually is one of the reasons why. The second is the budgets were assisted greatly by the previous government allocations at the last part of the year, which again helped with budgets. So it's a multifaceted position as to why it ended up there, and not entirely in line with original forecasts delivering online. In terms of, through you, Chair, the points around the home to school transport and the briefing note on send. If the Chief Exec wants to just nod or join in this conversation, he will know that I've had on my weekly agenda with him the home to school transport issue. I feel it's extremely off track. I cannot understand some of the rationale behind some of the figures, and I've been very challenging in this area probably for about 4 or 5 months now. And my request for you, Chair, is as you ask for a briefing note actually on the trajectory of send and the send costs, as we just heard, actually our costs of home to school transport are an outlier, and I suggest that we have a full deep dive into actually the home to school transport element alongside the send, which will help us to understand that better. So I'd appreciate that, and that'll be up to you if you could add that on. In terms of the paperwork in front of us, thank you, Stephen, for producing this, and thank you for the quick and prompt responses to all the emails I've sent in asking some of the questions, which means I don't have to ask them at the committee. But with the change in the constitution, sometimes I have to do that because no longer allowed to move amendments on the day as we hear information from the officers unless it's emergency. So I need to clarify things in the short period of time before that cut-off date you introduced. In terms of the papers, I wish to comment on 2.2.6 at page 33, which is about the safety valve agreement that this council under this joint administration agreed with government. And it's £10 million off track. Right? We all know that. We've covered that before in this committee. But what we also covered in this committee was the blame being fairly placed at the DfE, which was previously, as of before last week, a Conservative government, shifting the blame onto the government, saying it was due to the delay in building of their end of the deal. Subsequent to that meeting, at the next meeting, in between that meeting and the next one, I queried with officers, out of the amount of money that we are adrift, just how much is due to the government failure to deliver and how much is due to the Conservative end. And it was very much the thin end of the wedge. But 2.2.6 now has re-emerged, trying to shift the differences back into the previous government and not actually into the county council end. I'd also like to add that it says that the delay arising from the special school being built in March, my information, which was only maybe a month or so old, was that the March one is on track to be delivered on time. So if that has changed or my information is incorrect, seeing as I do represent March, I would appreciate a separate issue on that, a separate point on that, please. The next one I wish to go to is I'd like to thank Stephen for clarifying the page 37. The final outturn for the capital is 8.981 million underspend over all years, not only just over the term of the MTFS. Of that 8.981 million, I've followed that up further. And there is £1.4 million of borrowing funded spend that could be assumed to come without any impact on finances. I mentioned that today because we have full council next week, and there is a plan to allocate some resources to the St Neots Bridge, trying to get that bridge sorted out, the options appraisal of £250,000. And there's also a £42,000 request for in a separate motion for to do with funding of parades, and I had to get that put forward routes for funding for that. And I would suggest that the St Neots one certainly, whilst you may not like the route of funding that is in the papers going to full council next week, which is past the date change. There is £1.4 million of capital funding available that has not been used in any plans whatsoever, and this is confirmed by officers. So there is some spare money to move the St. Neots Bridge forward. I can share that email if anybody wants to question that. On aged debt, I was a little bit concerned about the narrative, page 42, and the extent at which aged debt is going up, because it seems to be that we've dropped the NHS responsibility entirely out of the paperwork now. And we know from papers that we've had in discussions before that there is a real issue with our negotiations with the NHS and their level of debt to us. And that actually got circulated in the news quite recently, and that's very worrying. And I just wish that I do think we need an update from officers on where we are with that and what we're going to do about that, because we cannot just keep saying it's our partner and they're holding us over a barrel. So can we get some sort of update on what the negotiation position is? Because we're just not getting that money, and it is very, very aged now. I'm also, another note, I'd like to take us to page, let me just find the note, if I may. It's on 5.5.6, and I don't have the page number immediately. This is the balance, page 45, thank you. Page 45, this is the balances head by schools. Now, I appreciate that the Children's Committee may have a closer watch on this than we do here. But we know that for various reasons, schools are desperate for money, and I accept that. The future world may be different. But when I look at the surplus revenue balance of some of these, and we have a nursery school with £400,000 in over 400,000. We don't know what the level is, but over 400,000 in reserves. We have four primary schools with over £400,000. I do wonder, considering that the way that the formula works and that, whether there's any deep dives go into those. Now, it could well be that through charity work or whatever, some school has, asked parents and they've had a donation to build a swimming pool or tennis courts or whatever. But I just feel that if there's a limited pot, we need to understand fully why some schools have massive reserves whilst others are seriously challenged. And we see in the next paper 2 schools that are seriously challenged. So perhaps we could just have some reassurance from the chair of the Children's Committee about some deep dives into there to understand that properly. So thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you. I think there are a number of different points there. Stephen, do you have a couple of those that you want to feed back on, and then others might come to other people?
Yeah, and do let me know if I'm missing anything, Councillor Count, from your comments. So just you referred to begin with I think reserves use going into the bottom line position. I would say the only reserves, the large reserve use reported in the report is due to the waste pressures, which the use of that reserve was budgeted in the business plan, and that's referred to in the mitigations table in summary section 2. I think then in terms of other things I can update on, the St. Neots scheme, the overall capital scheme underspends in that summary capital table at, if I find it on page 37. So the overall scheme forecast outturn variance is £9 million, of which 1.4 million is not dealt with in any business plan. Obviously, that will then be subject to review as part of the business plan for 25-26 onwards. And you would imagine if nothing is done with it, it will be part of reducing the capital financing budget and closing the budget gap. And whether the preparatory work on any of the St. Neots work is capital in nature or not would have to be looked at. On aged debt, I might leave to others an update on the overall NHS position or come back with further information. But you are right, the note in the report doesn't refer to the NHS debt, it refers mainly to adult social care debt, and actually the NHS is a key component part of that, so we should ensure that is referred to in that note. And then finally from me on school surplus balances. So Schools Forum certainly gets an update in some detail on school balances, both council maintained schools and once they're published, the academy accounts. We have a member of staff who trawls the academy accounts to try and find their balances as well. And that deep dives a bit into why some schools end up with large surpluses where others don't. Some of that is the nature of the funding formula, and then some is, like you say, community funds held. We are intending, as I say in the next report, to bring more information on that to this committee and to CYP committee in the new year, given the particularly the scale of the deficit position on some schools. The issue with school balances, surplus balances, that we can only claw back maintain school balances. We do have the power theoretically to do that, but it goes into the overall pot, which is available to the academies as well, but we have no power to claw back their excess balances. So that's why there is no current redistribution work done in that sense. But I think that's probably it from me by way of update on those points.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And that last point is an important one. I think Michael wants to come in on something.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up further on a couple of other points, or one other point, and come back to another point that Stephen just covered there. I think the safety valve agreement paragraph mentions a number of other factors as well. Just on the NHS debt, I'm pleased to say that in June the ICB agreed and we resolved the funding issue for the community equipment pool. So that's 3 million of that debt. The rest is tied up to the Learning Disabilities Partnership, which is a major area of reform. And the council continues to take advice on that. And there was a report taken to the Adults Committee a couple of weeks ago, I think it was now, in terms of an update on that position.
Thank you. I'm going to let Bryony come in and then I'll come back to you, Steve. Bryony.
Thank you. Just to go back to the schools and their budgets and the monitoring of that, as has been mentioned, we do monitor this both through our relationship with schools, through out-term reports, through our school improvement partners. Obviously, there's monitoring. The Educational Achievement Board looks at this, and we've also discussed it in chairs, vice chairs, and spokes. In terms of that responsibility and managing those budgets, we work very hard with schools to do it. Where we have some outlier schools, there are specific issues, and that's why we're bringing those to SNR today. In terms of the schools that do have funds, they're schools who have scrimped and saved and have specific projects in mind. I can tell you we have no schools planning to build any swimming pools or tennis courts. In fact, the maintenance of any sort of those facilities across the county, across the country, is becoming more and more difficult for all of our schools, whether they're maintained or trust schools.
Thank you. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bryony, for the confirmation that the deep dive into those surpluses does happen, because we only get this snapshot picture, so it's a appropriate question to ask. Thank you to Stephen for confirming that there is the money in the capital programme that is completely unallocated at the moment. It could, of course, as you say, form part of the 25-26 budget process, or it could, because it's unused, be used at any point in time without infecting any of this year's budget or the 5-year MTFS whatsoever, whatever point in time the members, or certainly the joint administration members, choose to spend it. Yes, I recognise that on the SEND project, some other elements were there for the coming off the safety valve agreement, but there is no doubt that the narrative focuses it in one direction, which seems slightly askance to the actual amount of numbers in the one direction compared to the other. And Chair, through you, there was the actual question of, will you ask for the actual briefing note on the SEND and the trajectory to also include the briefing note on the home to school transport, which is where, as you said, we are now outlier of nationally. Thank you, Chair.
Bryony.
Sorry, I will try and shut up at some point. Just to reference that, according to the LGA report, which I can't find currently, we're not actually an outlier compared to other statistical neighbours. Other rural counties are finding the similar issues in cost, particularly since both war in Ukraine and the trust budget and increasing costs in fuel and that kind of thing. So we're not as an outlier as such, but we obviously recognise the huge cost and the risk it brings to the council.
Thank you. So on the briefing note, yes, definitely we will include home to school transport in that. Chris, did you have something else you wanted to say?
On a separate subject, if I may.
Yes,
Thank you. I have two questions. Do you want me to ask them together or separately? Two different points.
together.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. First item on paragraph 5.4. It's a subject we've discussed before, both in this committee and also in the Audit and Accounts Committee. And that's to do with the percentage of undisputed commercial supplier invoices paid within terms. And you have agreed with me in the past that it's really important, especially for our smaller suppliers, that we do make payment within terms. We failed to meet our target this year, not by much, 94.6% as opposed to 95%. But we're given the encouraging news that in the month of March alone, we actually got to 97.7%. But when we look at the narrative, we begin to see why that's happened. And the narrative explains that we've actually changed the rules during the course of the year, and the number of now supplier terms of immediate payment or 0 days, they're only permitted in exceptional circumstances. So we're now achieving our target, more than achieving our target of 95%, but only because we have increased the terms that we are allowing for payment. I actually think it's sensible to increase the terms because that zero days immediate payment was always, except in exceptional circumstances, it was always a nonsense. So that is an arithmetic explanation about why we are now over exceeding the target. But given that we've changed, should we not also change our target? That 95% is no longer a relevant target. It should be a higher percentage in order to compare like with like, given that we've changed our policy towards 0 days payment. My second question is to do with the waste disposal. And this didn't get as much attention in this report as I expected, given that we're told in the report that because of the changes in Waterbeach and other things, that we are at least overspending now by a rate of 5.2 million per annum, together with whatever the effects may be on revenue of certain capital costs going into revenue, which haven't been specified here. Given how high that amount is, and it's an ongoing amount, the urgency of getting a solution is really important. And I'm not getting the impression that there is a great deal of urgency, as much urgency as there needs to be, to deal with this overspend. I'm not suggesting for 1 second it's a simple question to answer and to get to find solutions, but this does feel as though it's been dragging on for some time, and I wonder when we expect that overspend of at a rate of 5.2 million a year plus, when we expect that overspend will be corrected by whatever corrective action is finally taken. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you for those questions. Stephen, do you want to come back on that? Yep, good.
So if I take Councillor Bowden's point about the general balance sheet indicators and the percentage of the payment within terms, we've, as you'll see in the next report, reviewed the targets for these indicators and talking about sort of payables manager and others. Given that the target wasn't achieved at 95% precisely because of the nature of having too many suppliers on 0 term or immediate payment terms, actually 95% is a reasonable target for payment within terms when the terms are reasonable and not immediate or 0 days. On the waste side, so the waste probably doesn't feature as much in this report because it's not generating in itself that much of a variance this in 23-24 because of planned use of reserves to mitigate it. It I think does feature a bit more in the report for period 2 for the current financial year. And others may be able to update on the status of that with reports that are scheduled to go through EGI committee and potentially here as well later in the year. But obviously it's a big issue that we need to get to grips with to mitigate the financial pressures.
Thank you. Are you happy with those answers? Or
Just briefly, if I may, Lucy, thank you very much indeed. Given on the indicator on payment within terms that we even in March had managed to get up to almost 98% thanks to changing the rules, as we should have done, keeping that indicator at 95% is not a stretch target at all now. And if I may ask you to ensure that is changed, because clearly it's now no longer an appropriate figure to put in. The second point on the waste disposal, still didn't quite get an answer about the urgency and the hoped for resolution in terms of timing for the correction of the overspend. And if you have any feel for that, I'd be very grateful to hear it. Thank you.
So I think I will pick up on the waste issue where I know there is very considerable urgency and effort going in across particularly the NGI committee on the recap partnership. I know Frank's been spending an extraordinary amount of time on that topic. There is no lack of energy or determination to try and solve that problem. It is a really difficult problem, and therefore I'm not going to give you a date by which we can fix it, because I just don't know what the date will be. But there is no lack of determination. And if Lorna wants to give any kind of thing, if Lorna will have more information on this than I do. If you want to come in with any more, Lorna, on in terms of timescales and things, feel free. But in terms of the awareness of the very large issue that contract is for this council, and fixing the problems that we face with that contract, it is right up there in the top priority box for us to deal with. Do you want to say anything, Lorna, or have I said what you needed to say? And then I'll come to Michael on the other issue.
I'll just add briefly that clearly these are huge numbers we're talking about. We're talking about a very large, very old, very clunky contract that doesn't meet our modern needs. We need to work out what to do about that and how to do it. We also need to be mindful that much of that discussion about possible alternatives and possible solutions is commercially sensitive in discussions with our commercial partners, and that there are local authority district partners on the collection side, and recap that this also has to fit in with. That's not to say we're dragging our feet. We are absolutely not. And I'm hopeful that the changed political landscape nationally may be helpful to us in helping us through this issue. We will certainly be seeing this coming back to EGI in the coming months, and I'm sure we will be a lot further forward when that happens. But we need to get this right, because the consequences of getting this wrong are absolutely horrible. Thank you.
Stephen, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Two brief remarks. One, to endorse Councillor Dupre's comments around the extensive work that's going on around the waste contracting issues, and that being commercially sensitive, so not one for discussion in open session. But from an officer perspective, I can absolutely assure members that that is something that the foot has not been taken off the gas on ever, and there is massive amounts of work going on behind the scenes. However, that involves some very delicate discussions, and importantly, as Councillor Dupre has also said, responding to government regulatory changes and working with our district partners. So just to reassure members, I can absolutely say that the work has continued, is extensive, is detailed, but is perhaps not for public session. So we're happy to pick that up with colleagues through the EG&I committee and other fora as appropriate. On the issue around prompt payment performance, if I can maybe come back to that, Chair, and just remind members that later on today's agenda, you have the proposed performance management framework refresh. And subject to your decision making on that, we would, of course, be looking at key performance indicators for the authority to report upon. Equally, it might interest members to understand that from October of this year, following the implementation of the new Procurement Act, based on government advice, all public procurement contracts are required to include a 30-day payment term, and some of the government's own performance indicators are actually much lower than our current performance and indeed our 95% target. So we will have to reflect that accordingly. So my reaction to the suggestion is, yes, we can look at the benchmarking process. Yes, we should look at the key performance indicator, but that's only once members have decided if they're satisfied with the new performance framework. Thank you, Chair.
Is that sufficient? Michael, no, that's fine. I had a feeling Stephen might have covered what you needed to say. That's great. Thank you. I don't see any further hands. Just before we finish this item, I also wanted to add my thanks to Stephen and Michael and the whole finance team for bringing this budget in as close to what was planned as could ever reasonably have been expected. I did also want to say something about the use of reserves, in that I think managing a council budget of the scale that this is, with constantly moving targets in terms of wide variation in inflation, changes to the national living wage mid-year, all sorts of things that it is extremely difficult to predict how they're going to work out, particularly demand in areas like social care and adults. It is a reasonable way to try and mitigate many of those uncertainties, to have reserves with which we can use where they are needed and when they are needed. And that is the way in which the budget was originally set, and it is the way in which the budget has been used. And I think that was good planning, and I would like to thank our finance team very much for the way in which they've managed that over the course of what has been a very difficult year. So thank you all very much indeed. I'm just trying to think whether, do we need to vote on this one, or are we? Yes, all those in favour of accepting the report, if you could indicate now, please. That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the finance team, who are now back on for item 6, the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report for the period ending the 31st of May 2024. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So following on from the previous item, this report presents the first set of consolidated management accounts for the new 2024-25 financial year as at period 2 or May. As well as summarising the overall position, there are a few more recommendations in this report, which I'll cover as well. So on the revenue budget, the Council is forecasting at period 2 an overspend of £6 million for the year. Similar to previous year, where we are, like many councils, nationally still facing cost pressures from the very high cost of placements for our highest need children in care. Despite allowing for significant growth in that budget, we're still expecting to overspend based on current trends and numbers of children. And we're also still expecting some delays to delivery of income from renewable energy schemes. The waste pressure referred to earlier impact on the budget as well this year, and those both are offset within place and sustainability by additional income. In particular, on the energy schemes, while that's only a temporary delay reported in the management accounts, these are solar schemes, and the sunnier months are usually earlier in the financial year, so greater income is lost. The council is also forecasting again an overspend on the dedicated schools grant, the high needs block, taking the cumulative deficit at the end of the year to a projected £52.7 million. So dealing with recommendations A and B, which touch on the revenue budget. So with recommendation A, since the start of the financial year, the council has received the third tranche of settlement monies relating to the guided busway. Recommendation A proposes to move that into the same major infrastructure cost reserve as the tranches last year to cover future costs that we will face in maintaining the guided busway. Then with recommendation B, following a review of budgets early in the year, the Adult Health and Commissioning Directorate, with an endorsement from Adult and Health Committee, propose a budget variant of £200,000 from the uplift in the ring-fence public health grant to support the recommissioning of sexual and reproductive health services. That portion of the grant uplift is unallocated currently, as the final grant figure came late in the budgeting process. On the capital programme, the council undertakes an annual process to review each and every capital scheme at the start of the financial year following closure of the previous year's accounts to look at cost estimates and phasing by year. With capital budgets in particular, the time between budgets being set and the start of the year can result in a lot of updated information being available. That exercise results in, is summarised at 4.5 of the main annex and set out scheme by scheme in Appendix 6, and results in budget variants proposed in recommendations C and D for capital budgets. In the main, the phasing review, recommendation C, pushes funding backwards based on estimates of delivery dates and timescales, and also reduces borrowing, which will see a revenue benefit. Some schemes do see a movement of funding forwards into the previous financial year, as spend on those was quicker than anticipated in 23-24. Increases in borrowing, which are subjective recommendation D, generally relate to cost increases due to rising prices or critical work to maintain the council's property estate, and I'll set out scheme by scheme in the report as well. The final item on this to draw the committee's attention to again is the council's maintained schools. The previous item set out the challenging financial position overall of the council's maintained schools at the end of the last year, and this report then sets out the position of those schools in terms of setting their budgets for 24-25. The number of schools setting deficit budgets is increasing year on year, and this year 13 schools have requested to set a deficit budget at a level that exceeds officer delegated authority to agree. Deficit budgets for schools ought to be accompanied by a recovery plan that brings the position back into balance over the medium term, and the council, through the Children Education and Families Directorate and the finance team, are working closely with the schools listed to ascertain the cause of deficits, the exact quantum of deficits, and recovery options for them. We obviously would like schools to have an agreed budget as soon as possible, hence recommendation E, requesting that delegation to the Executive Director of Finance and Resources to agree deficit budgets for these schools where appropriate. The position on school budgets has historically been reported regularly, as I said earlier, to Schools Forum and annually to council committees through this report and to CYP, but we are intending this year to bring these updates a bit more regularly to both committees. And then finally, the report again presents information in Annex B on the council, on the services that are within this committee's remit, but that summarises the overall position and the recommendations, so I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Questions on this paper? Steve, sorry. Oh, let's just do questions first and then we'll come to the amendment. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. My question is very deliberately worded to avoid the trap mentioned earlier that we mustn't talk about anything which is commercially sensitive. Ignoring the DSG issue, the highest forecast variance is on place and sustainability for the year. And I do appreciate that the figures we get after two months are highly speculative, and I'm not trying to tie anyone down to any specific figures here. However, I'm interested in the assumptions which have been made behind the place and sustainability forecast variance. We are told that allowance has been made for the additional costs that we were talking about a little bit earlier to do with waste disposal. But there has been some offsetting, as we were told, on that. And additionally, on top of the additional waste disposal costs, that we have to allow for the shortfall or projected shortfall on energy income. What we haven't been given is a breakdown of those figures. So I'd be really interested to know the extent to which, or the timing of which, the additional costs to do with waste disposal have been put in to these figures. Is it assumed that in these figures, is it assumed that that additional cost will be for the whole of the remainder of the year, or have we only allowed for part of the remainder of the year in terms of those additional costs before some other solution is found?
Stephen, I'll come back to you, but I think it may well be that some more information after the meeting might be an option. But Stephen.
I mean, in respect to the final part of Councillor Boden's questions around timing, I'm not sure if that is best dealt with separately, but the report at Appendix 1 does provide a bit more of a breakdown of the key variances that the directorates face. So that does give the quantum of the forecast overspend on waste management and energy services separately in more detail about those. What it doesn't do on the waste side is specify exactly how long that is assumed to be for, which might, I'm not sure if might be more of commercially sensitive nature. So whether we announce that now or provide a separate update.
I think can I take that away, Chris, and we'll get back to you because there are also questions about what we're allowed to tell. But anyway, we'll come back to you with more information. I think it is important that you should have the information that you can have. So we'll come back to you with more on that.
Thank you. It's always better to give an accurate answer rather than not. I don't expect anything which is commercially sensitive to come across. I'm merely talking about our budget forecasting and what are the assumptions behind those budget forecasts. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I will then come to that. Sorry, Councillor Sharp did have his hand up, and I know that there's an amendment that's coming. So
mine's more comments than questions, if that's okay, Lucy. Thank you. Two basically. The first one, and it's touching on the amount. I mean, we did have a discussion at Children and Young People about the balances, and I'm a governor of. It's in my record of interest. I'm a governor of two schools. One's a very large secondary. The other is a 65 pupil rural primary school. And I'm the finance lead on that governing body. So I'm aware of the issues that schools of that level have. And I welcome what Stephen's just said about looking at the calls for if you look at page 126, 5.43, I'm sure there are all different reasons why those deficits are there. But I welcome the fact that you're looking at those and welcoming with them, because certainly we and I'm sure we're not alone, the governing body I sit on, we've had to make some very difficult decisions to get the education right. So I welcome that, and I know at CYP, which I think was accepted by Bryony, we would going to have a paper to do a more deep dive at some stage later in the year. So I do welcome that, because it's a massive issue, and I'm not going into the whys and wherefores because it's too complex. The second point, and it's more as the opposition, we're here to challenge, and so it's not critical of anybody, but I'm going to make the comment about back in January, February at CYP, I made the comment when we were looking at budgets around the children in care placements and the home to school transport, because obviously I've got the figures behind from the CYP papers. And I did make the comment, I think my comment was, I wish you well to achieve the budget, but I'm struggling to see how you're going to manage it. And obviously we're already, and as Chris quite rightly says, we're only at months 2, so these are very early snapshots, so it might change totally. But I'm a bit concerned that this early in the year we're flagging up some overspends. And to say, I'm not saying I told you so, but it was one of my challenges back in January that I thought the budget setting was optimistic. So those are the two. They're more comments than questions, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments noted. Shall we move? I can't see any other hands. So if we move to the amendment, did you want to say something? Sorry, Steve, in that case.
Sorry, Chair. I thought you'd noticed me earlier on questions or question statements subject separate to the amendment. So on the capital expenditure, Chris has already covered it to a certain extent. We're back on the energy projects. They're over time, over budget. They're costing us money, both costing more to build, and they're also costing more money because they're not delivering the savings that we want. But there's a common theme running through the I could use the word rationale, or I could use the word excuses, but whichever word you choose, there's a common theme running there, placing the blame on contractors. Contractors didn't assess this. Contractors didn't ask that. So my question there is, if the contractors are to blame, where are the CCC contracts in terms of risk management, holding them to account and getting that money back? Because surely if you can place the blame squarely somewhere else, you would have covered that in a contract. Separate in the document, I'd say that there's another golden thread running through, and it's something that we have repeatedly spoken about at this committee, and it's basically about people management. Okay, you have huge gaps in your budget because you say we can't get staff for this, we can't get staff for that. It's a national shortage. We had the Children's Committee was the first to launch a children's strategy, but we see that in their area, it hasn't really worked so far. So does it need a refresh? Does it need to examine what is going right, what is going wrong? Because there is a large agency spend now going on. In the Adults Committee, yes, they did finally come up with one after date, but it's a very short-term one. Later on in the paper, we've got a people strategy, but it's only a 12 to 18-month people strategy. And it's taken probably 18 months to get to this point. And I worry about the actual impact that anything that gets passed actually happens at the end of the day. Because as I say, in the figures, this is a repeated and recurring theme. On the amendment, which I'll get to later on, one of the reasons I brought the amendment forward, and this is to do with schools deficits. I just want to talk about schools deficits. It's in the recommendation. There is going to be, we heard there was 14 where there are going to be new plans brought up for recovery plans for deficits for schools. We've got in front of us 2 that are getting special treatment. We'll come back to that in a moment. But the question for me is, are any of these schools at risk of closure? Is this the first warning shot that we're getting there are risks of closure. I know that at least one of the schools, which is in a conservative area, has had notifications to members, so they're fully aware. So I'm going to jump to the assumption that the other one is. But I just wonder, you know, how bad we get some feel for how bad this is when we talk about a deficit recovery plan and what the ultimate scenarios might be in terms of if recovery plans are not able to be met. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Bryony wants to come back on that point first of all, but then I'll come to Sue on the some of the other points. Bryony.
Thank you. If I can refer to those 2 points, and you've jumped ahead slightly to Agenda 12 and talking about the people strategy. In children's, this is working really well. We have HR representation on our SEND Improvement Board, and that's added to our collaborative working and increased ability to respond to issues immediately, and discuss queries about how we can improve our recruitment and retention. And I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but I do know that our recruitment and retention and our use of agency staff are all going in the right direction in children's. Going back to the deficit budgets, obviously the way that schools are funded is very complicated. We are funded through the dedicated schools grant, and the ongoing funding that we have had, which puts Cambridge County Council at 136 out of all the local authorities. So in the bottom, absolute bottom, for so many years has added to the cumulative issues. I'm not having any conversations with anybody about closures of anything, and that's where we stand. And as you have seen through the past, closure of a school is a very difficult and complicated process, and that's not something that we would enter into lightly.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Just on the point about, you know, it is successful and it is working. Our people strategy in 1.2.4, the overspend position in the Children Education and Families Directorate continues to be concerning. Later on, as well as this, we're engaging a large number of agency social workers in excess of staffing budgets, and the staffing budget was massively increased this year because of last year. So I can't share your enthusiasm that it's working well. You might have some successes, but if it's off track on an increased budget, then it can't be said to be working well. Perhaps there's more that could be done. And as I said, that is a common theme. We've got the same in public health, and that is partially driven by the decision to separate from Peterborough City Council as identified 1.2.5. It's a common theme.
Sue.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to clarify one point, that the people strategy runs from 2023 to 2028. The report today covers the action plan, which does have an 18-month time frame around. It covers the first phase of the delivery of the strategy, and we want to pay close attention to that action plan. So we have framed it around an 18-month period, but the strategy is for longer. And just on the point about the agency spend in children's, then certainly the action plan off the back of the recent Ofsted inspection does give us a very clear target about reducing that agency spend. So obviously colleagues in children's services will be working towards that as part of that broader action plan. Thank you.
Elisa.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very briefly, I wanted to address the point about contract management, which is something that we are very, very awake to and alive to in the administration. We've had a significant issue managing some of our contracts entering into administration in the first place. Some of these contracts have become very difficult to manage following events which have happened over the last couple of years. There is obviously, well, there's a question for us, which we are still addressing what we do about it for our future plans. There is obviously a question as to whether it was wise to sign those contracts in the first place. They didn't give us enough cover, considering what might happen over the time period that they were supposed to cover. And you can probably guess where I'm going with this. These weren't contracts that we signed.
Thank you. And I think Stephen wants to come in on public health.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief comment. So mindful of what's in the report, I guess it's important to just rehearse the point that the public health grant is ring-fenced and indeed was ring-fenced to both Peterborough and Cambridgeshire. So all of the staffing costs are covered within the public health grant for both authorities. So actually, we might have a temporary period of an increase in cost because we're going through a period of separation with Peterborough, but that would be expected to normalise and would be contained within the ongoing public health grant, unlike our neighbours who I understand are having to put additional revenue funding into their public health team post-separation. Thank you.
Steve.
Do I understand from that, Stephen, that if we use the public health grant to cover these increased costs, that is money we can't spend on public health?
Well, actually, we're required by the Regional Director of Public Health to increase our staffing spend within that area to improve expertise following the annual assurance meeting he undertook with us last year. So I can happily share his assurance letter with members outside this meeting, but that will give you a clear indication that he wanted us to increase public health staffing within the grant. In terms of that money being used directly on interventions, then yes, it does reduce intervention spend, but actually it improves expertise and commissioning by public health. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, may I just say thank you for that clarity, both on the fact that it can't be spent on a direct intervention, but also on the information we didn't have that you was asked to increase the expenditure on public health staff, which was the subject of a Conservative amendment at the budget when it was cut in mental health staffing through public health in the first place a year ago.
Thank you. I think I'd quite like to get back to the paper we're discussing, but all right, Stephen, come on.
Chair, sorry, just one point of clarification, if I may. Given that public health is a ring-fenced grant and the allocation is fixed to Cambridgeshire County Council, there was no reduction in spend in the public health grant and the ring-fenced amount remained as it was allocated. Thank you.
Thank you. If we could get back to the paper in front of us, that would be very helpful. Are there any further questions on this paper? Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd actually missed in my notes. I also wanted to raise the risk of the safety valve agreement. It's now £52.7 million is the predicted gap. Should government say, I'm sorry, we're no longer going to allow you to carry that on your books, you're going to have to make that up. That would be an absolutely massive risk to the council. So I think it's worth highlighting this. We know that we had a safety valve agreement that this joint administration agreed with the government. We know that we are off track on that, and we know we are in negotiations to try and deliver a new one. Now, whatever the reasons behind the reasons we're off track, whether you place that with the previous government, whether you place that with increased expenditure or increased amounts of people that was unpredicted, or whether you place that with county council services, it doesn't really matter to me for the point that I'm making now. The risk is absolutely immense. £52.7 million is at risk here. Some of that will be covered by the DFE grant. And I wanted, just because it's not in the paperwork and you wouldn't expect it to say that other councils have already failed and been removed from that system. So it's not automatic that once we get a safety valve, we will somehow manage to renegotiate a new one. And I can only bring it to your attention and this committee's attention that this is an absolutely massive concern to us on the SRMP, to everybody. And I know that you'll be putting your heart and soul into trying to get a new agreement, and we mustn't rely on blaming others. We must actually get evidence-based information in front of the commissioners to get that agreement at whatever level it might be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will pick that one up because it is indeed a very large risk to this council. It is also a very large risk to a large number of other councils. And I was fortunate enough to meet with the brand new chair of the Local Government Association yesterday. She is coming in having been chair of the Children and Young People's Board and is extremely aware of the scale of risk that these these deficit budgets, which we have been forced to carry as deficit budgets for many years, are placing to a large number of councils. So you are not wrong that will be very, very high on our agenda. It will be very high on the agenda of quite a large number of councils who are facing probably even more extreme situations in terms of the risk that that places than it does on us. But those budgets are a huge worry for the whole sector, and we are tackling them. I mean, the whole sector is aware of just how significant that risk is. I don't know if anybody else wants to make any further comments. Michael, did you want to say something?
The only point, and I will clarify this, Chair, I'm not aware that any council has been removed from the safety valve programme. There are certainly a number that are going through enhanced support and further discussions to agree what their new plan is, but I will need to go back and just confirm and check that.
There are also some who had their safety valve proposals not taken forward that will need to look at renegotiating. Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen, for that update. As Chris correctly said, this is the early part of the year, and it's always difficult to know how it's going to move forward. We do have an amendment to this paper, which I think is to do with the school's deficit, and where I think there is agreement that we will change the recommendation so that the recommendation is to be agreed by the chair and vice chair of both committees. Steve, did you want to say that?
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, but I think that the process is it's our amendment, so I propose it as an alteration. We wouldn't want anyone to think that we were sleeping through the paperwork and not putting forward improvements, should we say. So the amendment proposed by me, and I believe will be seconded by Councillor Goldsack to my right, is to paper 6, which we're on, recommendation E. It's basically a delegation in consultation, existing consultation is the chair and vice chair of this committee. All right. I thought it was appropriate because as well as the finance impact on agreeing a budget deficit recovery programme, that the children and young people would also get a voice in that to note what the impact of any arrangements are, and therefore I proposed in the amendment to change it from the chair and vice chair of this committee to the chairs of both committee, being live to the viewpoint that on this committee we have a Liberal Democrat chair and a Labour vice chair, and that would still retain that balance of two separate parties by going that way. However, the request this morning of Councillor Netzinger to include the chairs and vice chairs of both committees, I'm happy to do that as an alteration. So therefore the recommendation is now in consultation with the chair and vice chair of both this committee and the Children and Young People Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm happy to accept that if the rest of the committee are. It seems like a helpful suggestion. So on the basis of if that amendment is accepted and everybody is agreeable, we will move to the vote on this item. All those in favour, if you could indicate now. That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. And we will move on to item 7, which is the productivity plans. And this is Michael's paper. Michael, are you happy to speak to the productivity plan?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick recap. So on the 6th of March, the Chancellor asked local authorities to submit productivity plans for the 19th of this month. A similar request came out from the local government minister on the 15th of May to the pension funds and it provided further clarity on the request for local government bodies. They're attached to Appendix A and B. The request called for member oversight and endorsement, hence the paper today, and to the pension committee on the 18th. The draft plan attached at Appendix C addresses the points flagged by the former Minister for Local Government with links to previous and ongoing decisions and plans of the Council, many of which have been through this committee in its current and previous guise. The plan also makes some suggestions to government on policies and practices coming from Whitehall that could be reviewed to drive greater efficiencies in local government. And therefore, I open it for discussion for us to feed back to then submit for the 19th of July deadline.
Thank you very much. I hope you found it very helpful to your productivity to have to produce the plan, Michael. Does anyone have any questions on this, Steve?
Not so much questions, more a bit of a statement on this. So I think the county council's officers have done a good job of responding to this. I think it's very helpful to point out improvements to central government that could be made. Another one, I'm totally aware of the LGA saying to government, okay, you're after productivity. One of the suggestions we make to you as an organisation is that we don't always have to ask you just for money. We actually have ideas on how to improve productivity, and let's have a open conversation on that. And I know that those conversations were live with the previous government, and they will be live with this present government. I think that the productivity plan, despite us causing work here at Cambridgeshire County Council and our local district neighbours and Peterborough, etc., may be a bit of a not viewed as the best use of officer time here. However, if you look through the government lens, and there's been some real outliers nationally, it may help them to identify those that need support and change. And therefore, I don't really see that this will, apart from a name change perhaps, or the person responsible, I don't really see this as being thrown into the bin by the new government. I could be wrong. But I do think that maybe whilst some of us have to go through it and have by needs of a low funding settlement, Cambridgeshire County Council has to, within certain parameters, be quite an efficient council, whereas others don't. This will help government identify some things. I do have an amendment, which I'll get onto as and when I'm invited. But yeah, that is, I think this is necessary, not on behalf of us, but on behalf of government and others. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. My heart sank when I saw this agenda item on today's meeting, and when I saw there were 4 appendices to it. And the reason it sank was I suspected, as a result of that, that officers had gone way overboard and had done an enormous amount of work on something which I believe has very, very little value indeed. I'm pleased when I actually opened the appendices and saw what was in them. I was pleased that my suspicions were wrong and that officers have had a very light touch approach to this. And certainly, whilst everything could be made lighter, I have to say that I think officers have been entirely correct not to devote an over amount of time to this particular exercise. Thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful. Graham.
I agree entirely with what Chris has just said. The only thing which I would add was the results of the recent external audit, which demonstrated what good value for money Cambridgeshire County Council currently provides, and the thing that we've discussed recently about the outturn of the revenue budget. So if there was room to squeeze that in, I think it would be worth doing. If we haven't already done so, and the LGA haven't, I would suggest that some of the things which we're asking of government, we should share with our neighbouring authorities so that they could also include in their submissions.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say I agree that I think officers have spent a proportionate amount of time doing this particular exercise. More broadly, I would like to see productivity improvements and plans for other parts of the public sector. I think members will be aware that for quite a long time, local government as a collective has been viewed as the most efficient part of public sector delivery in the UK. So it's rather unfortunate that we don't see similar requirements being imposed from any government, whether past or present, around improving productivity for areas beyond local government. So I guess my comments will be confined in that space. To the point around Councillor Wilson's remarks, just to say we have been sharing these plans across county councils as part of our work through the County Councils Network and through the Association of County Chiefs and Society of County Treasurers. County councils were very clear in sharing effectively a template response to this, that we wanted to minimise the effort counties were required to put into it and come up with some fairly standardised responses, and also some both local but also collective views on where government needs to free us up to be more productive, much of which is reflected in here. I am confident those will continue to be used for discussions with the new government. Thank you.
Thank you. And back to Michael.
just to say in response to Councillor Wilson's point, I think there's we followed the local government minister's format religiously, so I didn't see that fit into response to the questions, but I think a line could be added just to update government in terms of our position re our accounts. So I'm quite happy to draft an amendment if the committee want me to add a paragraph in, sorry, a sentence in on our value for money opinions being concluded.
Thank you. I think it's difficult to add that at this point because we are approving this plan. So see how if you think you can do that without it needing to come back to committee, but I'm comfortable with the paper as it is. Are there any? So we also have an amendment to this. So Steve, do you want to speak to that now? Because I don't see any other questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose an amendment to 7A, basically to add the following comments. The response to be revised to include a commitment that Cambridgeshire County Council will not seek to introduce and does not endorse a 4-day working week or equivalent arrangements of part-time work for full-time pay. Just in speaking to the amendment, Chair, in the actual productivity plan set out by the previous government, there was a very specific reference to this in the speech and the guidance put forward by Michael Gove. And the words that I've actually included are actually the words that he used to describe the situation. Now, I don't know whether the new government will stick with that, but that is the current productivity plan situation with Whitehall that we were asked to respond to alongside the guidance and the comments, and therefore I thought it'd be useful to cap that off. I'd like to say personally, I absolutely endorse the fact that I do not believe that paying somebody 5 days a week for 4 days work is a good step forward. And I was quite surprised. I know the new government's just been in, but see a major report in the Telegraph that Angela Rayner actually wants to see this expanded, of people getting 100% pay for 80% work paid for by the council taxpayer. I would just like to say that in our direct employment, should the Cambridgeshire County Council choose to do this, our direct employment, mainly blue collar workers, that would be the best way to describe our direct employment. However, the vast majority of our spend goes on social workers and people that assist people at home. You cannot say that you will get 5 days work out of somebody that is to help somebody go to the bathroom, get in and out of bed, cook for them, and say, you know, you can do your 5 days work in 4 days and we'll pay you 5 days. It's just not possible. It'd be an insult to them. I think it's an insult to people that have got to pay their tax bills to say, I want you to go to work 5 days, earn 5 days pay, be taxed on that to subsidise public sector workers, where it's okay to have 20% of your time extra off. So I fully believe that this would be a good stance for Cambridgeshire County Council to adopt, and to not adopt this as a response, I think would be remiss. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Chris. Do you want to speak now?
I'm happy to speak now. Yes, thank you
Okay.
very much indeed, Lucy. I'd like to look at this in the context of the fact that residents right across Cambridgeshire are having increasing difficulty paying the ever higher council tax demands that they receive, the overwhelming majority of which relates to the county council function. And I think that residents really expect the county councils to do everything it can to provide its services as efficiently as possible. Now, I think hard-pressed council taxpayers across Cambridgeshire would be appalled if the joint administration were to refuse to rule out part-time work for full-time pay, because the only real justification for that, well, there are two possible justifications in terms of this being able to be done without substantial additional cost and substantial additional money from the taxpayer. The first justification would be if we are saying that our staff are currently only working for 80% of their paid hours, which I don't believe. I don't think there is an enormous headroom in terms of the amount of hours that people are actually working for which they're being paid. So the second way in which it can be justified is that going to a 4-day working week would increase productivity by 25%. And it's completely unproven, certainly to the extent of 25%. And to be honest, it's inherently unlikely. And the experience that overwhelmingly the majority of people in the private sector, who are the majority of residents in our area, the experience that they have is that a move such as this cannot be justified on financial grounds. Now, we're expecting the council taxpayer potentially to pay a significant amount extra, and that's why I'm expecting, Lucy, that the joint administration will agree with this amendment, because I don't believe that you could want to put that message across to the council taxpayer that they're expected to subsidise council employees working for 4 days a week and being paid for 5 days a week. I do hope that you do support this amendment.
Thank you. I think Bryony would like to comment.
Thank you. Firstly, to address Councillor Bowden's point, refusal to rule something out is not the same as ruling it in. It's a refusal to rule something out. Whilst I was awake with a leaking pipe this morning, I was fortunate enough to read the report carried out by University of Cambridge and the University of Salford into the South Cambridgeshire District Council's 4-day week trial. And this report shows that there were 22 out of 24 KPIs which improved or remained the same in the time period, and that money was saved in terms of improved recruitment, retention, and positives around health and well-being of staff, all of which I think we can see as benefits. I'm not advocating for a 4-day week, but I'm suggesting that rather than ruling something out, we base a judgment on both research and listening to experts, and not saying that we will absolutely not do something before looking at the evidence before us.
Thank you, Bryony. Henry, did you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think, as has been mentioned, I think the staff at the County Council, especially in the care sector, are already on quite varied and flexible contracts with work here. As far as I'm aware, the County Council aren't considering introducing a 4-day week or any variant of that. So for me, as Bryony's just said, to completely rule something out seems unnecessary. So yeah, I think this amendment is probably looking to do something that, you know, we aren't endorsing here. So, you know, for me, I wouldn't be supportive of the amendment as it stands.
Thank you. Elisa.
You see, I kind of have to say, when this item was tabled in the first place, I knew this is where it was going to go, and then, you know, the amendment appeared just as I was polishing my crystal ball. This is a problem that goes right back to the beginning. The problem that we have is that this productivity plan in the first place was requested not out of any sort of goodwill or good intention on behalf of the previous government. It was a means to further a culture war and a blame game based on the fact that, you know, councils were going bust and are still at risk of going bust all across the country, given that, you know, we've had 14 years of an absolute nozzle around our necks in terms of limited funding and limited recognition of demographic pressure. We've had these discussions many times before. And of course, you know, the reason isn't that we weren't funding you properly. The reason is that you weren't productive enough, which is absolutely outrageous to suggest. We have had this discussion in full council. I was worried it would go down this way again during this item, and I don't want to take any more excuses for a culture war in this context, because it's absolutely silly. No one works 4 days for 5 days pay without any kind of evidence that this will lead to better productivity and less expenditure for the council, because the taxpayers' money will go into the agency fees that we are all paying. So, and there is absolutely no question that social care or direct people go into people's homes business. This isn't a 5-day business, it's a 7-day business. So we absolutely have to stop using ridiculous excuses. I mean, there is no need to rule something out that we aren't ruling in the first place. If anybody was ever going to consider introducing something like this, it would be done on the back of evidence. Just enough of it already.
Thank you. So I don't see any other hands. I'm going to sum up on this particular item, and then we'll come to a vote on the amendment, and then we'll come to a vote on the overall paper. Just a couple of things I want to say. The first is that I have already written to our MPs who asked me about this earlier this year to say that we have no plans to implement a 4-day week. It is perfectly clear that we have no plans to implement a 4-day week at this council. So raising this yet again, I think given Chris's comments earlier about how important it is not to waste too much time on this productivity plan, I can't help feeling that the time we're spending on this particular amendment is also a waste of time. But I do also want to make what I think is a really crucial point, which is that this council is not a 5-day week council. It's a 7-day a week, 24-hour day council, because we are responsible for social care and flooding and emergency planning. Our staff work incredibly hard on a whole range of different contracts that cover different timescales and different flexibilities. It is crucial that we have the flexibility to carry on managing those contracts in the way that makes the council the most productive it can be. And I do not want to tie our hands in any way about limiting our ability to manage our staff as productively as we can do. So I don't support this amendment. I think the amendment has just been brought in order to try and get a political debate on something which the whole paper is about, trying to get political debates on things that actually are not entirely helpful. So if we can move to the vote on the amendment now, all those in favour of the amendment, if you could indicate. I've got 6 on that. Thank you. All those against? And any abstentions? No. Okay, thank you. The amendment is lost. And if we could now move to the vote on the overall plan unamended, if all those in favour could indicate, please, that would be very helpful. That's unanimous. And I'd like to also echo the points that were made about the planning that went into this, so that it's a very proportionate and well-drafted paper. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will move on to the discussion on the annual risk register, which is, I know, one of members' favourites. Mairead, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair. So for this item, there are a number of appendices and annexes to consider, the most important of which is Appendix 1, where you will find the annual risk management report. This report summarises the risk management activity undertaken during 2023 to 24 at Cambridgeshire County Council. And the report summarises the key systems and policies we have in place to support effective risk management at the authority. A key part of this is the Council's risk management policy, which is attached to the report as Annex B. This policy underwent a major review in summer 2023, and aspects of the policy, such as the risk scoring matrices and the Council's risk appetite, have also been subject to some detailed in-year review by CLT, as reported previously to this committee. We are not currently proposing any further changes to the policy, but it is represented to this committee for their consideration, and with a request to endorse the risk management policy. The report also summarises progress on implementing actions within the Council's 3-year risk strategy, which was approved by this committee in July last year. Some of the actions that have been implemented, including re-establishing the Council's corporate risk group, emphasising the reporting of risk in the new committee report templates, and ensuring clear guidance on risk management is included in the Council's new project management framework. As well as updating on progress with implementing actions, we have also refreshed and updated the strategy for the current year and added in some new actions. Full details of that can be found in Annex C to this report, which presents the refreshed risk strategy. And again, we are requesting that the committee endorse the strategy. The current corporate risk register is presented as Annex A to this report. And in particular, I would highlight that the risk owner for risk 12, which was previously called the risk of climate change, is proposing to retitle that risk. Cambridgeshire County Council is not adequately prepared for the impacts of the change in climate. The risk has been reassessed and updated for the version which is in front of you today, and it is also expected that the review of that risk will continue with further updates to that to come forward to this committee in future. And finally, just to note, before I take any questions, that this committee has previously requested a risk workshop be held. This was originally scheduled for the 11th of June, but had to be deferred. The workshop was to include discussion of how to report direction of travel in corporate risk reporting to this committee. But if members have any suggestions or requests for other areas they would like to cover, then please do let me know. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mairead. Chris is first.
Thank you, Lucy. First of all, may I congratulate officers on the direction of travel that we have had to do with risk management. I believe that there has been significant improvement, but I think that the officers concerned would be the first to accept that this is only part of the journey and that there is further still to go. We haven't reached a final conclusion. And whilst I fully accept that there shouldn't be amendments made every 3 months to the policy, nevertheless, we should recognise that there are areas where there are potentials for greater improvement. The first thing I'd like to emphasise, and I'll explain this rather later in the meeting, is that it's quite correct that we do have a risk management policy. And I'll come back to that at a later agenda item. But as far as this is concerned, there are 2 elements which I still find disappointing, or where there is definite room, in my opinion, for improvement. The first, which I know that you will love me bringing up again, Lucy, is that what's really important when we're looking at the risk matrices, the really important thing is just how severe the impact may be of something which happens. And that's why I look forward to the day when the County Council goes along with the progressive risk management approach of some other bodies, including some other local authorities, and measures risk to do with effect or in a geometric way rather than an arithmetic way. And that would be a more appropriate way, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others in that industry, of creating a risk matrix. The second thing is to do with our risk appetite. And it's quite correct, and we've moved forwards on this, that risk appetite is now flagged up and it's beginning to be better understood. But we still don't have, in my opinion, the granularity on risk appetite that we should. The overwhelming majority of risk reported to us has a risk appetite of 15. Why should it be 15 on almost everything? Now, it isn't everything, I have to say. I think that the risk 12, I think it is, the newly named one on climate change, doesn't have a risk appetite, it has a target score, which is different from 15. But when we are progressing with our risk management process, I think that we need to accept that the risk which is acceptable and appropriate is quite often going to be different from that 15 number. And we haven't yet got to that level of sophistication in dealing with risk management in our system. So there are areas, I think, which can still be improved, but overall, I'm very, very pleased with this report. I would, however, welcome any comment that's made, about that geometric progression on effect in our 5x5 matrices, which is becoming more common now across the country. And secondly, the idea of having variable targets, variable appetite for risk between different risks. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. Mairead, do you want to come back on some of those?
Thank you. Firstly, just to thank Councillor Bowden. It's always positive to hear that we're travelling in the right direction. And I would agree that there's still a little way to go in terms of strengthening risk management. We are currently recruiting for a corporate risk manager, and I am optimistic that we'll be able to fill that post soon. In terms of the risk matrices, we have done a couple of sort of deep dives into that question with CLT. And while it was felt that there may be benefits to the adoption of that sort of non-linear matrix, in general, it was felt that actually, as a council, we need to embed our current understanding of the risk management kind of approach and really upskill staff in their familiarity with it. before we start iterating towards perhaps slightly more complex models of risk management. It is something that CLT have said that they are keen to revisit in the future, and it will be something that we continue to discuss at the CLT Risk and Assurance Group. And then secondly, the risk appetite. One of the things that we discussed at the most recent meeting of the CLT Risk and Assurance Group was undertaking a review of risks scored at 15 by CLT. So there's almost sort of a sub appetite there, which provides greater challenge to risks which are just creeping towards that 16 mark. So that's something that we'll be looking at in future meetings and bringing the results of that back to this committee as well. So I would say both areas are under review, and it's something that CLT have been very interested in, but we have not made any changes at present because of the need for that consistency and for really kind of improving awareness of our current policies and procedures.
Thank you, Mairead. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief comment. I mean, first of all, to welcome Councillor Bowden's remarks and also his remarks that have been shared through Audit and Accounts Committee, as have other members of Strategy, Resources and Performance who attend Audit and Accounts, around progress on our risk management approach. If only it were a journey and we had a fixed start point and a fixed destination point. Unfortunately, it's somewhat more fluid and dynamic than that. Mairead's explanation is absolutely right. I think we recognise that there is more to do in this space, and there are more improvements and enhancements that can be made. But in many ways, the steer I've given to the executive directors is I would like to see the current methodology properly embedded so we can then build from something rather than changing in midstream. And if I'm honest, I'm not convinced the methodology is sufficiently embedded yet to enable us to do that. That's why, arguably, you could say I've taken a risk-based judgment to continue with the existing approach rather than change in mid-flow. Thank you.
I can see that being appreciated. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I think the Chief Executive's comments are very practical, and that is to be welcomed. The issue here isn't the technical one about what a matrix looks like, or for that matter, what number you choose for your appetite. The ultimate issue here is culture. And I fully accept that it's a matter of getting the culture embedded, which is really important. I recognise the fact that the Chief Executive says that we haven't yet reached that point where there is sufficient embedding of the culture of risk management within the organisation as a whole. And whilst I'm frustrated that we aren't moving forwards on all fronts at the same time, I fully accept that there do have to be priorities. So I'm happy to hear the comments, especially from Mairead, about the iterative approach and revisiting certain things which I've already mentioned. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you very much. Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again, Mairead, for the report. It's excellent. Thank you. I'm just going to ask if it's possible to give us a little bit more help in understanding this. If I look at 4.52 and the table 1, which is the corporate risk overview, it shows us what the score was in March and in June, and it shows us they're all amber. And then your next 2 points mitigate that somewhat. 4.53, 4.54 definitely tells us that we shouldn't be worried about this. This is UK state. It would be really useful if that table 1 could also show the previous 2 risk scores, because then that would give us a real indication as to, is there any movement at all? Should we take what you're putting in 4.54 to heart, or should there be more behind it? So it's just a request there. Maybe I think that we might find that a bit more useful than spending quite a lot of time going around and trying to find the old reports to see what the previous scores were.
Do you want to comment on that, Mairead?
Yeah, very happy to try and implement that in the next report.
Thank you. I don't see any further comments. I want to echo what has been said by Chris and others about how this is a constantly improving document, and it is noticeable that it is getting tighter and tighter every meeting that we have. I absolutely agree that needs to be an iterative process, and it needs to be we need to have the confidence that it's not just the report that is getting tighter. It's the full understanding of it across every level of the council and throughout all our different departments. And I think that the change that's been made to the climate risk is a really good example of that being something which is now much more concrete than it was before, and feels much more something like we've got much more kind of control over, and it actually reflects decisions that are going to be made in different parts of the council, and that's what the risk register should be about. So thank you very much for the work on it. We are delighted with it so far, and we will look forward to it coming back again. Again, I think that's the all of the comments, and I'm just checking whether we need to vote, which I think we do. So all of those in favour of accepting the report and the risk register, if you could indicate. That's unanimous. Thank you very, very much, Mairead, and yeah, good work. Keep going. Thank you. Right. The next item on the agenda is the Performance Management Framework Refresh, which is Sue, I believe.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. And yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you. Just checked. This paper sets out our revised performance management framework. The refresh is underpinned by strengthening our performance management at directorate level, and much like the theme we've just been discussing, continuing to improve in the way we both manage and report on our performance. We're particularly keen to strengthen our reporting at directorate level to ensure effective reporting through to policy and service committees, with a focus through this revision to ensure that committees can focus on the strategic indicators in each of the relevant committees. The appendix that you have attached to the paper includes the guidance that's been issued to colleagues across the council on developing, managing and reporting on performance. The diagram at section 3.1 summarises the approach. So directorates have been revisiting their performance scorecards, and they will include core information for each directorate on workforce and finance alongside their strategic and operational performance indicators. And then it's the strategic indicators that will be reported on to the relevant committee. For this committee, then you will see here in future the combined data for workforce and finance and all the council's directorate strategic key performance indicators to enable this committee to have an overview of the whole council as befits the terms of reference for this committee. So you will see workforce, finance and performance activity all in one place. And I know that's something that we've discussed previously in this committee. We're also continuing our work on ensuring that we can benchmark our performance wherever we can, mindful of the suite of off-log indicators that have been developed for local government. And obviously, we're an active partner in those discussions with colleagues. And we will also, through this refresh, have our strategic key performance indicators linked to the council's strategic ambitions that are set out in the strategic framework. So through this approach, it will mean that over time, the links between reporting on our performance, both in service delivery and in service change, alongside our finance and our risk reporting, will be strengthened. And we're proposing through this refresh to have an annual performance report, which we will publish. So all this work has been informed by best practice guidance from the Local Government Association and the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. And today I have with us Jo Lacey-Holland, who's the Service Director for Policy Insight and Programmes, and Richard Springbett, who's the Governance and Performance Manager, who've done the detailed work on this refresh and have been working with directorate colleagues across the council on this. And they are here to address any questions that you might have alongside myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I was expecting in reading this to go through and think, excellent, all well and good, we're moving in the right direction. And for most of the 23 pages on the appendix of the actual report itself, I did. But page 4 stopped me in my tracks, and I was very disappointed with that. And I wonder if, Lucy, you might give some assurance that this could be looked at, particularly with the Chief Executive. What first struck me on page 4 was the subtitle, Performance, Risk Mitigation and Change Programs. And I knew when I saw that we had trouble, because we've just talked about our risk management policy. And we've all agreed that it's very good and we're moving forwards. Risk mitigation is a phrase which harks back to an earlier stage of how we used to look at risk and how we used to deal with risk. And looking through the diagram on page 4 and the wording on page 4, it's clearly all about reducing risk. it's not in accordance with our risk management policy, and I'll emphasize that word management. Risk mitigation is a different it's from a different era, and I think that it's really important that this integrates with our risk management policy, our appetite for risk, and our understanding of what risk should be. And given that it doesn't, I wonder, Lucy, and maybe the chief executive might have something to say about this, whether that page at least could be taken away and looked at again to bring it into line with the progress that we've been making in the last few years in terms of risk management. Thank you, Lucy.
I think you've got a yes, but
So yes, Chair, absolutely to Councillor Bowden's point, they should be consistent with the Council's risk management policy, and it isn't about mitigating risk, it's about managing risk. So that subject to that amendment and any other comments from members, we will happily make those amendments. Thank you.
And thank you for drawing our attention to that point, and for anyone wondering about the difference between mitigation and management. I think the point that you're trying to get at, Chris, is that we will have different levels of risk that are acceptable in different areas, and actually sometimes having a acceptance of a higher tolerance of risk is a sensible thing for the council to do, and sometimes we absolutely want to reduce our risk to the minimum level possible, and the mitigation doesn't reflect the differences. So I'm glad to see that you're nodding, and yes, we will look at that again, and thank you for picking it up. It's very helpful. Chris.
May I just ask if that page 4 could be brought back to us when it is amended so that we actually see it for ourselves? Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to have people looking at different papers with different things in their heads, so it's really helpful to have those comments. Thank you very much. Sue.
And just to confirm, we'll circulate the revised page 4 outside of the meeting so that you can see the work that's been done on that. Thank you.
Stephen.
Chair, thank you. Just a brief comment from me. I know Sue mentioned some of this in the introduction, but I just wanted to reassure members about the importance being attached to this refresh of the framework. I think it would be wise of me to reference the fact that what's being proposed is consistent with the current statutory best value guidance for local authorities. It also fully aligns with the Local Government Association's strengthened peer challenge methodology. Sue has referenced things like benchmarking, but equally subject to the future of how that develops. We will also have a performance management framework that enables us to work alongside the Office for Local Government should that persist in its current form. So I think I just wanted to reassure members that this isn't just something that addresses Cambridgeshire's local response, it's also how we align with national reporting requirements. Thank you.
Graham.
Lucy, I may have missed this, but within the reports that we get, how will we know whether projects have delivered to time, on budget, and achieved the savings that we have asked for?
Sue.
Thank you. And again, this item has been something that has been raised previously, looking across at Councillor Bowden about our reporting on our change programmes. And the purpose of this refresh will be to bring together that reporting on change programmes so that you can see in one place where we are in terms of our finance, including where we are in terms of our commitment to savings and our savings tracker, so that rather than seeing that dispersed across a range of papers, you can see that together and you can see the interrelationship between the activity and the delivery against the savings. So this refresh performance management framework is intended to enable us to refresh subsequently what you will be seeing at committees, both the look and feel of the way we're reporting on performance and be able to see across all those dimensions much more clearly. And I want to say, rather like the risk and in support of what Stephen has just said, it will be a work in progress. So we will welcome your continued input in refining and strengthening this work as we move on with it in the coming months.
Graham.
Thanks for that, Sue. I just wanted to clarify, rather than the emphasis on the savings, where projects are being delivered, like a new school is being built or a new road is being built or a bit of safety barriers being repaired in order to lift what seems to many members of the public a daft speed limit. How can we be sure that that will be delivered at the time that has been promised on the budget that has been promised. Is all that that sort of information going to come out of here, or will we need to delve deeply separately?
Sue.
So obviously within each of the individual policy and service committees, you will have an opportunity to see the refreshed indicators from the relevant services across the council, but also the opportunity, if you want to press in a particular area in order to scrutinise something that might be dipping into operational delivery, such as some of the projects you've just described, then you'll have that opportunity within that particular committee. What we will see here in strategy, resources and performance will be the overview of all the strategic indicators, so that you get a council-wide view. So the aim is that both through the complementary way in which that performance will be looked at in the service committees and in strategy, resources and performance, you will get a whole picture. But absolutely, you were there to scrutinise, ask questions and request further information if that's required.
Thank you, Graham. I don't see any. Mark.
It's just a question of how we're going to manage this, because like the speakers before, I think this is a really good step in the right direction and a really good report. But the recommendation on here is for us to accept this report. I'm not sure we can accept the report without seeing this page 4. So I'm just curious as to how we move forward on this.
Michelle.
Whether members would be in agreement to adding the word subject to the revision of page 4 as part of the recommendations. I can actually minute the fact that this revision will be shared with the committee first. So we will ensure that happens as an action, but in improving the actual framework, it will be subject to the revision of page 4, whether that's acceptable to members.
Steve.
Yeah, see, for me, this is one of the problems with the way that you change the constitution, because under the current rules, because this isn't an emergency or an amazing step in the thing that's going to affect and the wheels are going to fall off the wagon, it shouldn't be allowed. There's no recommendation allowing this. You change the rules to stop this sort of thing from happening on the day. Now, I'm perfectly prepared to say let's be reasonable, but it seems to me that this is repeatedly happening where the Conservatives have to say, let's be reasonable because the chair is going to allow it with their discretion. Whereas actually when the Conservatives have something, they say, oh no, look at our rule book. We're not allowed amendments and alterations on the day. Well, I think we raised it. We want it changed. So we're going to be reasonable. But I do think that the Constitution doesn't work in this way.
Michelle.
If I can just come back on that, I think that is a valid point. We are looking to reformat the Constitution, which we are doing at the moment. And after that, we will be looking at issues like this. We have a working group, and where you have a minor change, which has the agreement of the committee, then we need to look at how we can affect that, because that improves the effectiveness of the meeting.
My understanding of the current constitution is that it's at the discretion of the chair rather than. Okay, yeah. So Steve is right that this is not necessarily exceptional circumstances. Lorna.
Chair, I don't want to preempt that discussion, and I think it may be one that needs to be had, but I do think it is worth reminding this committee why that provision is in place. And it stems from a particular meeting at which an amendment was proposed at the last minute, which would have required the authority to enter into a very significant legal agreement with financial consequences, with absolutely none of the necessary officers present who could have offered any advice to the council collectively on that amendment. It seems to me that we need to protect this council against the risk of that sort of irresponsible behaviour. If we can find an accommodation that enables sensible, proportionate, generally agreed, straightforward changes to be accepted at committee, that's fine. But we need very much, in my view, not to reopen a position in which we are exposed to that kind of irresponsible behaviour and motions and amendments with absolutely no research and no facility on the floor of the committee to seek the appropriate advice. Thank you.
Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I completely reject that assertion by Councillor Lorna Dupre. That was not what actually happened. That's not in the constitution change papers that went in front of the council. The fact of the matter is you wanted to stop us from making amendments on the day. If you wanted to stop that from happening on that particular day, you only had to vote it down. You had the numbers. You had the numbers, you could vote anything day. The constitutional change went through the Constitution and Ethics Committee. It then went to full council. And this is the first time I've heard this claim made. And I was fully involved in objecting to that decision. So no, I completely resent that. But as I said earlier, Chair, I don't want to kick up a big fuss about this. I am glad to hear that the constitutional change is being reviewed. This actually comes about because of a previous meeting, which was, I'm trying to think, the lady's not here today, the chair of the ENGI committee, I believe it was, where, not the ENGI, it was another committee where a change was put forward on the day and I asked for the monitoring officer to review this because it wasn't exceptional. And since then, we've had a message back saying it will be reviewed. So this falls under the same category. I'm glad to hear that the Joint Administration is starting to look seriously at a rule that they implemented that is not functioning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't think we need to spend any more time revisiting old history or indeed discussing elements of the Constitution that are not for discussion at this meeting. I have clarified with the Chief Executive that work on this this piece of work can continue over the summer if this paper comes back to our next meeting. So I think rather than try and tweak things in an unconstitutional way, actually we will just defer this paper till the next meeting. We've had a good discussion about it. I'm hoping that the committee will be sympathetic that when it comes back next time we can have a very, very brief discussion about it and just pass it with the revised page 4. But I think rather than trying to do things that are non-constitutional, we'll just bring it back at the next meeting. So on that basis, we will not take a vote on it. We will move on. And I think I've got ahead of myself on my piece of paper.
Chair, because
oh, sorry. Yes, we do need a
2
10-minute break. We absolutely need it. We might actually let's take a 15-minute break, and then we'll have a very short one when we go into private session. So if we could come back at well, 12 minutes. We'll come back at 15:15, please. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, thank you very much to everyone who's back. I think we will get on with the next item on the agenda and hope that the other members of the committee, are we back online? Or let's assume. I'm sure other members will come in a moment. But I would quite like us to get on. Oh, that's a horrible noise. We've got quite a lot of more stuff to cover. Right, so we've done the performance management report. We then come on to Treasury Management Q4, which is Stephen. Oh, sorry, we haven't done, no, I missed one, sorry. Can we do the corporate performance report, which is Sue, in fact, sorry, Sue, stealing your moments again.
No, that's fine. Steal away. So yes, you do have in front of you the Q4 performance report for the end of the financial year 2023-24. This is the standard report that you're familiar with. A few things to highlight. As discussed previously, our indicators about days lost per full-time equivalent employee due to absence and our indicator on staff turnover are now revised. And so we are able to benchmark them, and we've added in targets in the appendix, and that you can see we've got organisation-wide data at a directorate level, and comparison with our statistical neighbours as well as local government national average. So a much richer set of data around our workforce, and obviously where that's something that's been discussed in this committee previously. Just to highlight some of the strengths that come through in the Q4 report is our the response to customer inquiries through the contact centre, and our internal responsiveness to IT requests have both been performing well. And the one red indicator that we have in Q4 is around freedom of information requests. We've had an increase in volume in that quarter compared with Q3, along with some changes in service which are referred to in the documentation, but also an acknowledgement that there's been a real focus on requests related to highways. And so work is underway between the Freedom of Information team and the Highways Service to maximise the information that we can put on that's published on our website to help us deal with the sort of common enquiries more effectively. So I didn't want to say anything else about the report, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Are there any questions? I don't immediately see any questions. Is this really good news to hear about the work with highways to try and make sure that we're getting better information out, so that people don't have to go via the freedom of information route, which is extremely time consuming. Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions on the report, so we will note that, I think. Is that correct? So that is noted. I'm slightly surprised that we don't have to, I'm sorry, I'm just checking, we don't have to vote on it. But, okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much, Sue. Then we will move to the Treasury Management Q4 update and annual report, which is indeed Stephen.
Hello again. So this report sets out the detailed Treasury management position of the Council as at the end of the 23-24 financial year. It's the second of two detailed reports this committee gets each year that then go on to full council for consideration in line with our own treasury management strategy and the requirements of SIPFA's Prudential Code. The report covers our cash management, borrowings and investments over the course of the year and sets out the council's position against the key prudential indicators and limits. So taking that last point first, the table at 3.2 of the report shows the council in compliance with the prudential indicators and limits. These limits are set annually by full council within broad parameters set nationally, and show the extent to which the council's borrowing position, cost and mix of loans can go and still be considered prudent. Overall, in 23-24, the council saw its external borrowing increase by around £41 million to a total of £778 million. This increase in the total level of debt was lower than assumed in the budget, linking to the underspend on capital financing costs that I discussed earlier. Due partly to higher than expected cash balances, good returns on cash we did hold, and slower than expected spend on capital projects. We saw interest rates on new borrowing increase in the year, particularly as short-term loans taken out several years ago at extremely favourable rates matured. The ongoing effect of that increase is factored into the medium-term budget. The council secured most of its borrowing last year from the Public Works Loan Board, as opposed to loans from other local authorities, which we'd seen a lot of in the years before that. And generally took out shorter term debt while the interest rates remained high on the expectation that those would reduce over time. The council's treasury investments generated a good return. In particular, dividends from our collective investment funds overperformed, despite the capital values of those generally being a bit lower. And we were able to take advantage of very attractive rates for day-to-day cash management to generate further returns. At Appendix 2, we set out the annual review of our collective investment funds. It's a required review which is meant to weigh up the returns gained from these investments against the opportunity cost of having cash tied up in them, which otherwise could be used to offset borrowing. As the review sets out, we still think holding these investments for the time being delivers better value for money despite the rising interest rates on loans, which has made the opportunity cost quite similar to the return that we get on those investments. Finally, the report also sets out the current position with regard to third-party loans of the council and gives a brief overview of the economic picture as it was at Q4, which, while out of date by the time I've come here to deliver this report, it is a retrospective report, and so the context in which the decisions on treasury management were taken is important. So thank you, Chair. I'll leave the introduction there.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Are there questions for Stephen on this report? Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. End of year gives us an opportunity to have a greater overview of the whole situation so far as treasury management is concerned. And it has to be said that given the amounts of money that we've had available for investment over that period, it's not surprising that we're seeing the sort of numbers that we are seeing. Two things strike me, one of which I've mentioned before. The first is in the table 1, the Treasury and Prudential indicators, where we see all 4 quarters. I just wonder if it's possible for that to be amended in future so that the annual MRP is separated out from other financing adjustments. The MRP is fixed for the year. So once it is fixed, unless I'm told differently, once it is fixed for the financial year, it stays the same throughout that financial year, and any adjustments which are made in the next financial year. So I wouldn't expect to see any change in the MRP in any of the 4 quarters from the first figure, which may be wrong because it had been miscalculated in advance of the previous year end. And that would just help to see what the other financing adjustments were. And we're talking about £20-odd million here. So I think it's useful to have those separated out. The second is a request that, again, some thought is given when we're looking at our treasury management strategy of the borrowing limits, the maturity structure of the borrowing limits. It makes no sense at all to have limits which under 12 months, anything between 0% and 80%, or over 10 years, anything between 0% and 100%. Those limits are virtually meaningless. And I just wonder if, at least when you're looking at the short and medium term, those numbers could be looked at again at some stage in the future, because at the moment they serve very little purpose indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to respond on those points?
Yeah, the short answer to both is yes. We can certainly separate out the MRP, which, as you rightly say, is pretty much fixed for the year, unless there's any overpayment potentially, which has happened in the past. So that's fine. And then in terms of those maturity structure limits, we discussed that the last time this report came, and same answer is we will look at those when drafting the treasury management strategy as part of the upcoming business plan, particularly taking into account some benchmarking what other similar councils do on that as well. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Very helpful. Steve.
Yeah, thank you for Stephen for the report and for referring back to the last committee meeting when we raised this before. I'm not sure what the timescale is for that report, but the reason that Councillor Bowden and myself previously have requested that this be looked at is because the severity of change, of sudden change. If in your 30, 40, 50 year borrowing, any sudden change doesn't really affect that. But in the less than 12 months and 12 months to 1 year, we've seen some massive swings internationally that we were all unprepared for. And we've taken advantage of that to have lower short-term borrowing for quite a long period of time. But we did raise that spectre repeatedly. And I remember Tom refinancing, I think it was the 4th year of our term, some single year loans because of that fact that we wanted to de-risk that. I believe that the 100% and the 80% is still too high. And I wouldn't like this to wait too long for this to be reviewed, because I do think that it's important that we set something that will we're talking about risk management earlier. This is a risk, and it's something that we haven't really got a mitigation in for. 80% and 100% is not a mitigation. It's just like do what's best on the day. It's not a mitigation against a gigantic swing in the market. Thank you, Chair. So if we could have some indication of timescales for this review, please.
I mean, ultimately, the business plan is agreed by council in February. The draft of the Treasury Management Strategy should be before this committee in the late autumn and winter time, depending on when draft of the business plan is taken. I should say the limits for 24-25 were set in February at full council in the business plan.
Thank you. I think it's an important point to raise, and clearly will be part of our discussions in coming up to the budget in the autumn. I don't see any further questions on that, so thank you very much for the report, Stephen. We do need to vote on this, so all those in favour of accepting the report, if you could indicate now. Thank you, that's unanimous. Excellent, thank you very much. Now we get to the people strategy, which is Anna Syson. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I'm pleased to provide committee today with an update on the Council's people strategy, specifically the engagement that's taken place with internal colleagues and networks to create an action plan to support that people strategy. And that is provided as Appendix 1, the action plan, with the recommendation that the committee note the contents of the action plan, which supports the Council's people strategy, and their updates will be provided via Staffing and Appeals Committee every 6 months. Background to this is that the People Strategy was approved by full council on the 16th of May 2023. We have undertaken extensive engagement internally on what should form the basis of our action plan since then, and also triangulated that with our results of our employee survey that we've discussed before. We believe the delivery of this action plan is achievable through existing resources. We're focusing the plan at this point on the next 18 months to the end of 25, and is intended to evolve as activities are achieved and priorities emerge and are developed, with governance via the Council's corporate leadership team and the Corporate Change Board. The corporate leadership team approved this plan on the 17th of June, just last month. And so, yes, I'm here today to recommend that the committee have considered that plan, note the contents of it, and I am happy to hear comments and consider any questions that you might have on that attached plan.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I think it might be your first time at this committee, and I should have welcomed you more thoroughly at the beginning. It's very nice that you're here.
Thank you.
So it's very good to see all of the engagement that's been had with a wide number of people across the council on this strategy. And I know that when we discussed the people strategy at full council, there was a lot of keenness to see the action plan. So it's very good that the action plan is now here, having been developed along with colleagues right across the organisation. So thank you for that. Are there questions on the paper and the action plan? Steve?
They're not so much questions, more the same similar comments to what I made earlier. What concerns me is we've taken a year to get to this point, and then we have an initial set of actions that will take up to 18 months, and then we have a full implementation by 2028. So that's 23 to 28 is the full implementation of this plan. And what concerns me is we have parts of our organisation that's struggling to recruit, retain, etc. We use quite glibly, in my opinion, the fact that nationally there's a problem rather than looking at solving things ourselves. And this is taking too long. I see that the original plan, which was to conduct a survey, you then look at the survey results and you consult going forward and then write a strategy. Why does that take a year? Why does it take 18 months to implement the next stage? I don't get my head around that. Now, the last time I raised this, I was told, well, we don't want to rush into these things. We've got to consider them fully, and they were all the fluffy end of the stick. They're all, nice, comfortable words, but it lacked the urgency that I see with this organisation's needs. And that's my problem. It's nothing wrong with this. Well, there's one thing that I think is wrong with it. It's the urgency at which we're looking for implementation, because most of this is business as usual, but actually exemplified in words. So EDI, do we have an EDI policy? Are we in fully bought into that? Yes, yes, yes. But we've got it in words in a greater way, in how we're going to put it in our advertising and things like that. So a lot of this, we could actually have much more of an action plan where we targeted individual things and say, I want this done by this date, I want this done by that date, rather than the great big massive titles that may take 18 months. There could be steps in there, milestones that we could achieve much faster. So that's the first thing. The second is the relationship between this and AI. I discussed this before. This is a people strategy, and we have a separate, this is part of a suite of documents which sets separate to the IT and digital strategy. But the interrelationship and the effect of one on the other is not spelt out in enough detail. And I think that during that time period, we will see an accelerated impact, and that isn't covered off in enough detail as to how the people strategy, how the suite of documents work together. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a couple of things I might want to say about that in a minute, but Sue, do you want to come in first?
Yes, just a point of reassurance that I think, Steve, as you say, this documents and puts into words the activity, and so that can be seen at committee. But I just want to assure you that work is ongoing, has been ongoing, and will continue to happen, and particularly in the areas that we've touched on before in this committee and in policy committees, particularly around workforce pressures in adults, social care and children's social care. So there are specific workforce plans that have already been developed and are in progress that are reflected in this plan. So just some assurance around we've not waited until this action plan is brought before you to take any action. And the second point, I think, around the interconnectivity between the people strategy and the IT and digital strategy and the developments in AI, I think is a very helpful point. And certainly looking at the strategies across the suite and the interrelationship between them, I think that is something for us to note and take away. I think that is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Edna. Thank you very much. I just wanted to welcome very much this report. I think it's excellent. And I think there's a common misunderstanding that we look at a people strategy rather like a delivery of an IT system or something. What we've got with the people strategy, the process itself is delivers engagement. It encourages motivation. It is that soft. There's a lot of soft activity that goes on that really makes the difference of night and day for our staff. And encourages them to go the extra mile. And it's really as much about management understanding what the issues are with staff as it is the other way around. But the process itself is part of the delivery. I think that's just a really important point to emphasize. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I fully accept the comments that Edna's just made about this being high level and being to do with processes which in fact are soft in terms of their application. And also the comments made by Steve and others that this needs to be looked at in terms of the interconnectivity with other reports that we have. However, I was surprised given, well, first of all, I didn't fully understand, and I'm sorry to go back to the word risk again, but I didn't fully understand the comments which were made in terms of risk in this report, which didn't really seem to make a great deal of sense to me. Paragraph 5.3 in the main report saying, and I'll just say it, the Council's human resources are not able to meet business need by ensuring we can deliver on our commitments to attract, support, develop and retain an appropriate skilled and qualified workforce. As such, there are no significant risks arising from the proposed recommendations in this report. That didn't make any great deal of sense to me. But when I look at the ability to attract and support and develop the workforce, one of the areas which isn't mentioned at all in terms of the implications for that is remote working, and both employees and potential employees' attitude to remote working and our business needs and how they can be met by remote working. And they weren't mentioned at all in this. And I fully accept that this goes into some of those interrelationships that we talked about earlier, including the management training so that the managers can effectively manage individuals who work remotely, and the ITC that's necessary in order to support remote working. But not to have mentioned it at all in this report, unless I missed it, I thought was strange, given that remote working, I know that it's not very popular with some people, this concept of remote working, and I deliberately use the words remote working rather than home working. There's a big difference between the two. And there is a misconception that remote working, and especially home working, means that people can skive off and not do a full day's work. And that is a total misconception, as long as you have appropriate management in place to control it all. And now none of these matters, but most especially the employees' attitude towards remote working and how that can allow them to have a better work-life balance and also to do their job more effectively than they otherwise might. That's missing entirely from this. And I would have expected to see something in here about remote working. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. Sue.
Just in terms of the risk, then obviously the risk around the workforce is more fully developed in the earlier paper as the appendix to the risk report. So there is a specific risk that is kind of amplified there in more detail. So I know you will be aware of that, but yes, it could have made a stronger cross-reference to that, but you have had information in committee around that that's more fully developed through the previous report. I don't know if Anna wanted to say anything about staff attitudes, employee attitudes to remote working. That might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Councillor. I think perhaps this is a terminology question for me to take away and perhaps just refine to be more specific, that when under appreciating you, for example, we talk about our ways of working. That is our policy and toolkit that sets out the ways in which colleagues can work flexibly, including remotely, outside of buildings, at home, in other settings, and trying to respond to what we've heard in the employee survey and the subsequent listening activity around that, about how people appreciate flexibility, how we can support that, is certainly core to this plan, but perhaps that phrase needs to be used more specifically. We've also will be developing a line in the accommodation improvement programme, looking at how our buildings support working, and perhaps we need to just say a bit more in there about not just the buildings, but being able to work in a variety of locations.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Anna. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't see any further hands. I wanted to say thank you very much for this report. I don't think it is quite business as usual, and just telling everybody this is what we do. I think there are some changes in here in the way in which the council supports its staff and its attitudes to the staff. Some of those are around the staff survey and the way in which that has been used to feed into this, which I think is really important. But actually, looking at the bottom of page 6, the bottom of page 5 and page 6, some of those things which are really important about making sure that everybody within this organisation has the opportunity for progression pathways, for secondment opportunities, the focus on apprenticeships and on upskilling our staff. I think that's really important, and I'm really, really pleased to see it in here. So thank you very much for the paper. I'm sure there will be further updates on it and further information about how this is progressing. And like many other things, it will be iterative and there will be more work on it. But I'm really pleased to see the report coming forward. So thank you very much indeed for your work, Anna. Right, I think this is one to note, so we don't need to vote on it. Thank you very much indeed, Anna. We then get to item 13 on the agenda, which is the agenda plan, the training plan, appointments to outside bodies and internal advisory groups. There is an item on this which has been withdrawn. I don't know I hope this message has got across that the item on the outside body appointment to the Wisbech Town Board we are going to delay while we get some further clarification from central government on the way in which that board should be appointed. I don't think there's anything else to add on this, is there, Michelle?
Yeah, there's just one more thing to add. The report is self-explanatory. The only thing to add in relation to item 5 is at full council, you did agree to appoint a member technology champion, and it will be at this meeting where that would occur.
Sorry, yes, I do have somebody in mind who has agreed to do it, but I haven't shared that with lots of other people, so maybe we need to. I'm happy to defer it or to take it now if people have views. I think it's probably better to defer it because we can take it next time. We'll take it next time because I think it's better to make sure that everybody has time to understand what the process is.
In the meantime, perhaps we want to orchestrate some sort of sharing of information about this, where it comes from and what we want to do, and for people to express what they think about it, whether they want to put themselves forward or just suggestions for those who do. I mean, I don't know. I'm quite happy to absorb a bit more on this if we're deferring it.
Great. We'll get some information out so that more people have an opportunity to understand what the role is and think about whether they would like to be involved in it, which would be really helpful. So are there any other comments on it? Steve?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate that the Wisbech Town Board, you're going to go through the County Council process for that at a later date. So I won't be talking to that directly. How I will be talking directly to the Cambridge Growth Company Advisory Council, Appendix 3, which is on Appendix 3. And it says the committee to approve. And in there it says, appointment is by invitation to the leader of the council by the chair of the Cambridge Delivery Group. And I just want to reference that I understand that the Wisbech board appointment is the same. Appointment is by invitation to a person by the chair of that group. And I think that's seeing as it what's gone ahead here is a fait accompli with no discussion allowed by us, and we have to ratify what's in front of us. I think there's a direct correlation between the current problems with the Wisbech Town Board appointment. I wanted to draw that to your attention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. It's helpful to have that drawn to our attention, and that is the clarification that we are looking for from central government, whether they are similar or not. Okay. I don't think, do we need to vote on this, or we do? Okay, if we could take a vote on the agenda plan with those bits withdrawn, if everyone else, if everything else is everyone in favour of the other stuff, if you could indicate now, that would be very helpful. Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. The next item on the agenda is confidential. So we need to, so I would like to propose that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the agenda contains exempt information under paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed as it refers to information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person. Please, could I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Elisa and Steve. All those in favour of moving into private session, if you could indicate now, please. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So anybody